Hi, I'm Michael Bracco, and this is Monsterfy, a live character design demo show where I monsterfy things in as many ways as I can on this giant canvas. Today's theme is trees. Being stuck inside this long really stinks, and the only way I've gotten out at all is by taking small walks in my own neighborhood and hanging out in my own backyard. And one silver lining to all of this is at least it's springtime here in Baltimore, so we are seeing all of our trees flower, and it's at least beautiful when we do get outside. Along with that, I've been doing some art lessons with my daughter, and one of the things we did is we walked around the neighborhood and drew some trees together. We had a blast, but all I kept thinking was, man, these big tree forms are ripe for monsterfying. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to talk about some basics about how to draw trees and then how to turn them into horrific monsters. So this might be the most Bob Rossi episode yet, but instead of happy little trees, we're going to do some horrifically demonic and monstrous trees. Let's get started. As usual, I'm starting with the same materials I use all the time. I've got my marker, my colored marker. This time I'm actually just using a nice Crayola green for sketching. And I am using a brush and ink for doing all my finalized line work. Alright, so trees are a funny thing. After teaching middle school for so long, I noticed that kids and adults all do the same thing. They tend to draw trees like this. Okay. Big circle, little two lines, boom. You get a lollipop tree. The worst thing in the world. Trees are such complicated and difficult things to draw, but there's a few things that we can learn. Number one, their trunks do not go straight up and down. They kind of come together like that. And before they ever get to leaves, they branch out into all sorts of different directions. Now the other thing is how people tend to draw the leaves on the top. They tend to just draw this big circle, or sometimes they'll add some like crinkly lines around it. But really what we need to do is understand that on a tree, the leaves grow from the branches, and there's thousands upon thousands of branches. We don't have time for all that, and we don't need all of that to get the idea across. So what we're going to do instead is we are going to just draw a big mass, but we're going to think about the texture. Instead of drawing all the individual leaves, which would be almost impossible, you want to give some larger shapes with texture that hint that there's more leaves. So I'm going to start on this branch, and I'm really kind of thinking about the edges of this tree or these leaves and how they give the idea that there's thousands upon thousands of little leaves. I can do it with little hatch marks, but really what's important is that I keep adding more shapes and making this thing feel gigantic. That's the other thing. People tend to draw trees and they make them really small. But trees are huge. Even a small tree is usually twice as tall as a human being. So by thinking about that size and scale and the texture, we can get a very realistic looking tree. If I was going to zoom back and draw that from a smaller scale, branch out my lines, and if I do the leaves as one giant shape, it's still going to look okay and like an actual tree. And it's not hard at all. And of course I add some texture lines, and I'm good. Great. That's a real basic tree. You can then add flowers and do a ton of other things, but it's not the only tree. Let's say you want to do a pine tree, okay, or an evergreen. I'll give you another basic tree form. I like to, and this is something I actually learned from Bob Ross, but and this is very shadowy and dark, and that's okay. But whenever I draw some sort of tall evergreen, I actually just start with a branch. And think of like a Christmas tree. And the branches stick straight out from that center point. And then from there is where the needles go. So somewhere in the middle, I'm just going to kind of make a messy line. Okay? And then as I go up from that messy line, I've made like kind of a cross or a T. As I go up from that messy line, I'm going to make more, but I'm going to get them smaller and shorter. And if you ever look at one of the comic pages I do, and you see me drawing trees, these are the tricks I use all the time. And it's a very fast way to do this. So it's great to do with a brush, but if not, if you've got something like a fat marker, like a Sharpie, you can kind of do this. Let's move on. Let's start monsterfying this. Now, because we are separating the tree form at the top from the trunk in these types of trees, and not the lollipop tree, but because we're doing that, we have the chance to think of what we can form up here and what we can form down here. So the leaves, of course, are going to make a great head. So I'm going to grab that Crayola marker of mine, and I'm going to start sketching. And as much as I just said, please don't do this lollipop tree, when I'm doing my gestures, when I'm trying to figure out my structures, it's not a bad idea to do that. I'm going to think about if there's going to be a face in the leaves, and then I'm going to think about a trunk, and think about what his roots are going to do. And again, right now I'm just scribbling. I'm just trying to come up with ideas. Let's see how I did. So I'm actually going to start at the top with the tree form, and I'm going to try to start, I always like to start with the eyes. And I don't want to define them like I normally do. Usually when I'm making eyes, I am going out of my way to like show pupils and things, but that's probably not going to happen today with these tree forms. What I do want is never to lose that feeling that they're actually leaves. So I just keep going with that texture, and I'm trying to get a lot of little angles to make it feel like leaves. And then of course with the mouth, the angles work really well as kind of weird teeth forms, real crinkly. Oh, let's give it some real sharp, leafy bottom teeth. I'm starting to like where this is going. I'm going to fill in the mouth real dark. As I say all the time, if you can find a good place to add some black, it makes things really clear because it adds contrast and gives kind of a negative shape for people to kind of focus on. So right now, the focus is on his eyes and mouth, which is good. It's a monster. In any good monster comic or movie or illustration, the thing you have trouble looking at, hopefully, are the eyes and mouth. They're big, they're scary, they're horrible. So I don't know what kind of tree this is. It doesn't matter. When I'm out walking with my wife, I'm always like, ooh, that's a dogwood. We have a dogwood in our yard. I have no idea. I never remember. But as an artist, it's more about learning how to look at things and find the patterns in the world and use them to your advantage. Okay, so I'm still building up these textures. And I want to build up some other big leaf shape forms. I want him to feel like one big shape, but not totally. So I'm adding more back in here, back in here, really trying to show the layers of the leaves, bringing some in. One other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to thicken up the outer edge of this just to solidify it. A good thick line, of course, also brings contrast. You're adding more black, more dark, and you're using it to encapsulate the whole thing. Really bring it together. Now let's start building up the trunk. I want it to like kind of wrap around like he's growing up and hunching over. Body language is super important here. I really want to think, I talked about this with the pizza episode, about how to add a spine. And so right now, I really want him to have a spine that's kind of going off in different directions. without ever losing that like tree-ness. I'm branching him off, but then I'm also kind of adding in things to make him have an arm. And where he has elbows, I'm going to add off some extra branches just to really highlight that. And on this arm, as it comes out, I'll give him a little knot, which is just a cylinder. We learned about cylinders in the robot episode. But it's an imperfect cylinder. It's a real gross, ugly one. Another thing we've learned about are cross contour lines, lines that wrap around to make something look more round. You can see I'm using those to make this branch a little bit rounder. Okay. Then I'm going to bring out a few. I'm going to split this arm almost into 3 fingers. Instead of finishing them, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover them in leaves. And maybe I can have, I didn't plan this, and again, that's the fun of this. It's not about a plan, it's about exploring something. Maybe I can have some leafy fingers. And I'll be honest, I don't know that I've ever made a tree monster before. So this could all turn out to be garbage. And that's fine. I am totally comfortable making drawings that I can't stand because that's kind of how I cycle out or siphon out the bad ideas in my head. So I'm going to bring out the other arm, again using cross contour lines. We're using a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, and we're figuring out something very new, very different. So I really want to bring this hand out also. But I want to do I don't want to do the same old thing as I did here, because that would be boring. So what if this branch has kind of withered and died? What if it's just gnarled branches that are falling apart? So I'm just going to start, I'm going to make a little like ugly cylinder, and I'm going to make this one branch here, and this will be like one of his 2 middle fingers. And I'll make it split way up here. I'm going to bring it down as like 1 finger, about halfway, and then split it off like a branch would into 1 finger over here and 1 finger over here. One of the things that is working for me so far is that because of that gesture, because of that loose drawing I did, I know where I'm going with this. So I know where he's going to grow out of the ground, okay? And it's going to be right back here. Maybe a little bunny made a home, happy little home in this tree, only to find out that it's evil and monstrous, and maybe thinks rabbits are delicious. So hopefully you can see him. Hopefully the tree doesn't. And hopefully I haven't traumatized anybody with my rabbit-eating tree. My daughter sees this, she's going to be very mad at me for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to give it a bit of a background. I'm going to put some of these trees behind it, kind of off in the distance. And one of the things that's tough is a lot of times when people make a ground line, if we look back to my little lollipop tree here, they draw a line at the bottom of the page and they sit everything on top of that line. It drives me crazy. So you never want to do that. Usually, a line, like an environment line or a horizon line, is going to go higher. And so, like, if I look at this one right here, if I put the line here, then this tree looks like it's on the ground, and there's plenty of other things to put on there. Now, if I wanted to put another tree behind it, I would make it a little bit smaller, and I would let it go behind this tree. And then if I wanted to go back further, it would get even smaller, but it would go higher and closer to that line, that horizon line. And then back in here, you might just see the hints that there are thousands and thousands of trees way off in the distance. Maybe I'll put a fence behind him, and then above him, what I could do is I could take this tree form, and I can start creating a lot of black space behind him. And again, I don't have to spend a tremendous amount of time on these trees. I just make sure they get wider as they come down, and I can use them to really make him stick out in the foreground. So here we have our first tree monster, our backyard tree monster, with our adorable little terrified bunny. And I think he looks pretty good. He's pretty scary. I think I want to move on. I think I want to get something totally different. I'm going to grab my green marker. And I try not to think these things through too much as I go in, because I want you to see my actual thought process and how I come up with things. Oh man, I got an idea. Okay, now we got something. It really does, every time, just come down to messing around and drawing with that that colored marker, and just not worrying about where your lines go, just messing around. All right, so I'm going to start, like I always do, with this, and go right for the eyes. This is going to feel very different because over here I really had to pay attention to the crinkle texture of the leaves to get the eyes and the face, and now I don't. I can treat this a lot more like Monsterfy's skin. I've spent a lot of time walking around outside in our neighborhood, keeping a safe distance, but I've been taking my daughter around, and we have been using our sketchbooks and just talking about what we see and drawing while we're talking, and it's been really great. And I think it's something that anybody could do with their kids, whether you're somebody who knows how to draw or not. One of the things we do is when we look at a tree, we talk about, like, what does the trunk look like? How does it come out of the ground? Does it come straight up? Does it come up? You know, we start pointing out the different shapes that we see. And then we've been drawing. And it's been really cool to watch my daughter, who's never done something like that before, at least not with trees, try to make sense of the world through shapes. And she does a really darn good job with it. And I think most kids do, because as soon as you teach them how to look around them and really start pointing out shapes or the way that lines move together, a kid will naturally listen and look and not base everything off of what they think they know. One of my favorite things about what I get to do this episode is I get to do the exact opposite of Happy Little Trees. This is a very angry tree. And, you know, we live in a world where trees have every right to be angry. So there's something cathartic about drawing something so beautiful in such a monstrous, angry way. Okay, I think I want to bring him down in front of my other tree monster. That might look a little awkward, but I think it's going to be worth it because I drew him a little lower. It's very important to understand that generally there's an optical illusion that happens. The lower things are, the closer they are. Because if the horizon line is back here, the further up and closer to the horizon line, the further away, because the horizon line is far away. The further down and further from the horizon line, that's closer to us. Maybe one of the things that I can do is I can actually keep something consistent here, and I can continue the background through the entire drawing, which I think would be a really neat thing to be able to do and really make this like one giant piece. We have a tree in my backyard that is beautiful, and it's been amazing for so many years, but it's starting to die. So as we have this thing that's starting to die in our backyard, instead of trying to get that shape, let's have fun with the branches. Because we can just have this dying tree going off the page and just branch after branch after branch. Let's speed this up now and just watch as I just go triple time on all these branches. So as you can see, I've added in some shadows, just trying to get a sense of where things are touching the ground. And my shadows this time, I'm using all these little vertical lines to kind of go with the texture of the grass. They're kind of helping to ground things. Here it's really clear. We can really see where our newest tree monster has used his roots to hoist himself up off the ground. Now I'm going to add in that background again. Add some different types of tree forms. behind this guy since he already has some black. So here we go. We've got a lot going on here. And I've got one more I'd like to do. Right now, we've got the leaf face. We have our dead tree that's come to life and lifted himself out of the ground. We can, of course, do one of these trees, but I actually have, I think, a better idea. For a little bit now, my daughter has been begging us for a tree house. Now, I don't know how to build one, but I sure can figure out how to draw one. So, let's make it horrible. I'm going to start with just a rectangle, just some basic shape, kind of like we did in that robot episode, to form a face. Really make him nightmarish. Like that thing that looks like casting a shadow, and that shadow is horrific. And then, of course, you look outside, and it's completely benign. Let's make this like, oh, I turned on the lights, and it's still horrible. It's still nightmarish, right? Let's have fun with the nightmares. Forget happy little trees. Glorious little nightmares. All right, so I'm not too worried about leaves. I might put a little bit of leaf texture up here, but I'm worried about making this tree look like it's coming from inside of here. I know my daughter doesn't really want a tree house. She wants a tree castle. And she wants to be made out of ice, like a certain movie made by a certain company, led by a certain mouse. She wants this ice castle to be year-round and in a tree. I can't do that, so instead I will make my nightmare tree house. Alright, I can use a couple of almost straight lines to create that sense of them being made out of wood planks. I can even put a dot on the end to make them feel like there's nails in them. So now I'm going to get this door. And I don't have to draw these things too perfectly, because honestly, it actually makes it better when they're not perfect. It makes them feel crankier and scarier. I finished with a lot of the structure of this house. And now it's time for me to get the rest of the tree. I want to make sure it's sitting on the same ground as these guys so I can finish off that weird composition that I've done. So I'm going to make it a little longer than I had originally intended. Again, adding that grass texture. There we go. And then I'm going to add some of these branches over here to kind of make these finger forms. And these are what I was talking about. These are the ones that are very reminiscent of those shadows you might see as a kid in your room, and then you wake up and it's just a shadow from the tree outside. And I'm using this texture. This one is one of my favorite tree textures to use, are these cross contour lines. The artist that I always think of when I do that is Bill Watterson, who, if you've never read Calvin and Hobbes Change That, it's a wonderful comic strip. And he would always his trees are like very gestural, and they just use a lot of quick lines that just suggest so much. They're beautiful. Never read Calvin and Hobbes, go do yourself a favor. Find an independent bookshop or a comic shop by you, and see if they're doing mail order or curbside pickup, and ask them to get you a Calvin and Hobbes book. And take a second and just look at how he paints, how he draws trees, because it's phenomenal. Alright, so I think I have finished, almost anyway, my treehouse monster. And yeah, he is horrific. Okay, so I'm going to bring the fence, I'm going to give it a corner. The tree shapes over here. And here we have it, our crazy monster trees. Not happy little trees, monstrous, gigantic trees. I can't wait to see what kinds of trees or other plants you monsterfy. Please do not forget to email your drawings to monsterfytheworld@gmail.com. Stay tuned for a gallery of tons of drawings based off of pizza and pets and probably some other things from previous episodes. But thank you for sticking through this with me, for helping me come up with ideas. Until next time, this has been
Monsterfy.